Hanach, Hanikadagibi, Hanachawida, Hainipi, Hochankrajada, Hahemaniwinga Hingaide, Nakamaikare Rajada, Elena Teriga Hingaide. So I wanted to greet you all a good day. And I like to start off always when I'm speaking by speaking my Ho-Chunk name, which is Hahemani. It translates to walks in the dark. And it's an old Bear Clan name, which my grandmother held. And she was this incredible humanitarian. But for us, when we speak our name, it kind of calls our spirit back to us and brings us to this space again. So I wanted to greet you all in my language as we're standing and we're occupying right now what was once our very thriving community of Dajope, which means for waters here in Madison, Wisconsin. And as Dina had mentioned, I'm an Indigenous chef. I do a lot with reclamation and food systems in our community, but there's a reason why this work needs to be done. And part of that is because of this displacement and forcible removals of the Ho-Chunk people. This once was an incredibly prolific space. I mean, we are actually occupying and standing on what was thousands of graves of our ancestors in this space. And coming to Madison is a beautiful thing, but also a little bit heartbreaking because we will never occupy this land in the way we once did again. We will never have access to this land in the way we once did, or the resources, because some of those resources have also been diminished. So let's go back to contact and what really started this. And it came down to what was supposed to be a sanctuary or a space for refuge for people became an incredible genocide on Indigenous people. And I can only speak about what I know from our history as Ho-Chunks. We were forcibly removed, and it has been documented by the Indian Agency House 11 times from the state of Wisconsin. Our verbal history says that was up to 16 times. And when you hear that, I mean, I don't like to say it in a way that is accusatory towards anybody that is existing in this moment, but I really want people to see what the effects of this were. It was a very strategic thing. There were plans in place, not only to significantly affect the immediate generation and the people in existence, but if this doesn't work, we're going to make sure that this is implemented and then this is implemented. And throughout the course of several generations, maybe they will eventually be eliminated. So there were levels of attack. Our first, I mean, one of the very first ones was our food stores. And I can say that some of my friends on the East Coast who had to suffer this in an incredible state had ways of preserving something like corn, you know, that would be able to be dried and stored in these places. From the moment corn came to us, we developed these. And those were the first things that were attacked by the colonizers that appeared. And they knew that if the seeds were taken, if the food stores were taken, we would have to go and move to a place where we were able to find more of those resources. I just want to note before I tell you a little story that the Bureau of Indian Affairs was actually established under the Department of War. They did that purposely. There was a strategy to doing that. And still today, with the bureaucracy that they make us have, I mean, in order to be recognized as a sovereign nation, we have to comply with these regulations from the Bureau of Indian Affairs report. We have a number that identifies us and also identifies our blood quantum, which is only also recognized by horses and dogs and Native Americans. So I have a number that acknowledges what my blood quantum is, so the federal government can keep track of that. Still today, 2024. We, in order to be recognized as a sovereign nation, have to also have a governmental structure parallel to that of the federal government, which is debilitating. So if you can imagine what it's like to get like a permit from your city, that's just one level of government that you have to navigate for somebody like me to get assistance. I have to not only go through our municipal, our state, our federal, but then I also have to do that on the tribal level. So starting a nonprofit, like Dina had said, like WildBearies, it has been 5 years and we're still going through like, oh, taxations and all of these other things where the government's like, oh, now you need to do this and now you need to do that. And WildBearies was formed as a direct response to a call to action from our tribe. There was a time in 2018 where we were losing a tribal member a week, at least, to something like alcoholism, drug abuse, sometimes even suicide from emotional traumas. So when you hear something like a large word, intergenerational trauma, I don't know that anybody can really understand what that is. There's traumas instilled that you carry in your body from these things, these suffrages, you know? And sometimes I'm tired of being resilient and strong and a pillar of knowledge and everything because it's exhausting to be that person all the time. And sometimes you have to acknowledge, like, I'm only here today in this space with the resources that I have because my ancestors had the beautiful foresight to sow seeds into their clothes as they were forced to swim across the Mississippi River. When they were sent to internment camps like Crow Creek in South Dakota, they brought our food with them and the food knowledge. We have been looking as an organization for the three sisters, right? The corn, the beans, and the squash that we once stewarded, because 200 years later, we still didn't have our original foods in our communities. And when you talk about food and culture, it is a clear sense of community, right? You go to the table and you eat together. You go and you share, like the very definition of a tribe is collectively working to care for each other. And it was strategically targeted so that we weren't able to do that. Okay, we're going to remove part of this tribe and we're going to send them here and there, and we're going to take their food, and we're going to take people who are from the woods and move them to the plains where they don't know any of the resources, where their food won't grow, even if they bring it with them. And it was all incredibly developed and implemented, and is still being implemented, some of these tactics. Like for me to have seeds is kind of illegal, right? They can come in and say something about us even having seeds that aren't regulated from them. So we had to look all over, tap into resources to try and just get some of our ancestral foods back to us. And as we're looking at these policies and we're talking about peace and community, I'd like to tell you how I actually met Dina. And it was that I was giving a talk at the Kickapoo Valley, and what was supposed to be, I think, a 10-minute talk that kept recycling, and it ended up being a 2.5-hour long presentation in a chipotle in the middle of winter, which is one of our longhouses. And we had a fire in there and it was very cozy. And we were talking about what, you know, ho chunk baskets and songs and tradition and all of these wonderful things, but we never address the things that really are difficult for us to talk about, because one thing, we were conditioned and told not to. It was a threat if we spoke these truths, if we acknowledge that sometimes I might have a weakness, because then I might be targeted. So we had these conversations, and afterwards Dina walked up to me and introduced herself and invited me to the farm, Echo Valley. And my daughter, who's here with me this morning, and I drove out there. We accepted the invitation and said, yes, I'd love to see your space. And when we did, Dina actually had a jar of ho-chunk white corn that she had been waiting for, had been trying to rematriate back to the tribe. And I say rematriate, not repatriate, because with us and with these foods and these seeds, they are the mothers and the grandmothers that care for us, not like the historical pieces or art that might be repatriated back to the tribe. We always acknowledge that this is a female entity. So she was trying to rematriate these seeds that they had at the farm that were given to you by the Smithsonian, I believe, for the purpose of seed multiplication. And there was nobody that was willing to receive them. And when we showed up, she said, I've just been waiting for a ho chunk to come so I could share these seeds. And at that time, we were just starting our nonprofit seed saving initiative. It was like, what a wonderful way to start building our stores than through community and through acknowledging that in this moment, no culture is exempt from these difficulties that we've implemented on ourselves in a way when we look at community, and acknowledging that as two completely separate individuals in the way we lived our lives, on this day our paths crossed and it started this beautiful relationship of reciprocity, I'd like to think, Dina, hopefully. but but of being able to not only share space and resources, but knowledge and friendship in the end. For WildBearies, our nonprofit, like I said, was a direct response to a call to action. And we really looked at what food means to our community when we say nourished. Instead of, nutritionally satisfied, or it's noon and I had a meal, what does it mean to be nourished in your community, to be seen, to be cared for, to be fed if that's what you needed, to have conversation if that's what you need, or just to have somebody stand beside you as you get up and brush yourself off. So it really addressed the disconnect that I think every one of us feels at some time in our community, a judgment, a disagreement where you feel some sort of inhibition to re-enter a space of community, that we could do that for them, individuals. Because for us as Ho-Chunks, we believe that life is supposed to be imperfect. We're supposed to stumble. It's how we get up, how we rebuild ourselves. That these lessons, when they stop coming and we've reached this level of perfection, it's time for us to move on from this earth. So let's make those mistakes. Let's be with each other in a stronger community. Let's learn from these histories. And let's, instead of learning from them in a way that we can build on a better attack, let's learn from them on a way that we can build a stronger community where we can acknowledge individuality, like where we can remember what it means to be a tribe in whatever sense we feel that space, and that we can care for each other differently. I think the shift happens when we stop looking at what capitalism brings to the table and what we start looking at what community brings to the table, and a reclamation of how we are intended to interact with each other. That balance needs to be reset. And I believe on a grassroots level that change is possible to be made, that I could see somebody who's struggling and say, I know what that struggle feels like, although I might not know what your individual struggle feels like. I carry generations of that struggle on my back every day when I wake up. But being in spaces like this, having friends like Dina, knowing that there's others who see that that struggle existed, but I am not defined by that struggle. I'm here writing my own story, following my own path. And regardless of whether or not people agree with that, I'm going to continue on in this way because it's what I need as a person. And in my community, I hope that these intentions and these efforts, even if it is something like sharing a meal with my greater community, let me cook for you. Those meals help drop walls. They help open space for conversation, education. Even I appreciate rebuttals. Like, let's have a conversation about this, because there's always something more for me to learn, especially from others. And from having those conversations, even in spaces like this, where there is a great deal of trauma, it's acknowledging that in this moment, we are here together. And how can we in this moment seize the opportunity to be a good ancestor? We wouldn't have the knowledge that we have as Ho-Chunks. We wouldn't have the food. We wouldn't even be here in Wisconsin again, because it's illegal in some places for us even to exist still today. If we didn't have the strength of our ancestors that knew how important it was to travel months at night under the darkness for protection to make it back to this space so we could be home. Because our stories of creation, our religion, everything centers around us being in the woods, being in spaces like this, these lakes, these waters. in Madison, what last year they dug out canoes, carbon dated 3,000 years. Our ancestors were here, living very prolifically in unison, stewarding the land in a very sacred way. And in 300 years, we have significantly changed the landscape and actually have made it illegal for Ho-Chunks to exist in certain spaces because there's a lot of resources here. And that's ultimately what it was about. Instead of acknowledging individuality or embracing the friendship, really, upon initial contact that was offered, it was let me have everything and let me take this. And we are still suffering from that, but there is a change happening, and that's the beauty of it. Like my daughter, this next generation, she's actually going to school here at the UW for policy and agroecology. Although I wish she was going to be a chef with me, she's found this beautiful space in caring and being a voice for plants that need that advocacy, for people that don't know how to maneuver a space, because we were told, don't sign those papers. Don't learn the system. Don't do these things because it's very threatening. So having to shift, generations of thought to say, we have to learn this. We have to learn this. We have to know it. We have to advocate, educate, all of these things to be able to continue this space. So I'm always very grateful to be part of a greater community. Like, we acknowledge that as Ho-Chunks, we are part of this greater community. Like, yes, this is our ancestral homelands. I live in Wisconsin Dells, where we have beautiful stories of the river and creation. And for me, that's always been home and will always be home, because for at least 5 generations, my family has fought to still call Wisconsin Dells home. So as more of these foods come back to us, as more of this traditional ecological knowledge, so they say, wakes up in our blood memories, as we find our footing on this sacred land again and really develop our roots, it's crucial that we continue building these greater relationships, that we continue saying that it doesn't have to be about battles, about you or me for survival, that we can exist together, that we can move forward together as authentic allies with each other in our community, not as extractive allies in our community, but to say that we are here supporting each other, and not in a comparison of suffrage, but as in hope for the future. How do we take a strong step forward? How can I support you in these things that we all have to face as humans, these struggles? And to say, I see you and I'm here, I'll show up and I'll stand beside you. I'll pick you up and brush you off, and we can move together forward in a way that is not only strengthening, but for me, very healing in my community. And that's something that we really need to think about for the future. And to say, like, yes, we have all of these resources because of the intentions of our ancestors. What space can we make for the future generations when we think of the 7 generations coming behind us in this world, which is how we think? We have what we have because of the 7 generations in front of us. And in this moment, we have to think of those coming behind. So creating greater alliances, recognizing that peace is possible, that we can do this together. And maybe it doesn't happen today in this moment, but the energy and the intentions that we set in place today in this moment turn into ripples, which turn into great waves of change. So we can do that together. And I'm always grateful to be included. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you for having me. Welcome us to this space, for including me in this journey, this vision. And hopefully, we can move forward together as strong allies in this venture of peace and justice. So,